You ready to talk wagon history?
You know, if y'all are new to our channel, we cook off an old chuck wagon. Cook for cowboys, been on numerous ranches we have. But where did this all start? You know, back many, many years ago when there were so many cattle leaving from South San Antonio, going up the Chisholm Trail to hit a railhead in Abilene, Kansas, there had to be somebody to feed them. First, Meals on Wheels, there it was right there, had an old feller up there in that buggy seat just bouncing along. He was the cook. He was the doctor. He was the dentist. Cookie's job was to make sure them boys was fed. You know, this old chuck wagon was more than just a kitchen sitting out there in the prairie. This was home away from home for tired, weary, and hungry cowboys. But also it was a beacon of hope. When they'd see that lantern lit out there, they knew where they could come. If they'd been out there night hurting an old cold night, shivering, gather up there around old Cookie's fire, get a hot cup of that coffee to warm it up. You know, we're also going to talk about wagon etiquette, then and now, Cowboy Code, and the Code of the West, and how we can apply that to our lives today. But before we start, I think y'all need a little tour around camp, I do. Now, when he had that wagon sheet drug out there, staked down, that is the term we call the fly of the wagon. Now, then next thing, he would let that chuck box lid down. Now, when that lid's down there and he's got a leg under it, that is his kitchen table. That is his kitchen counter. You see there is a water barrel. Now, they could be anywhere from 15 to 30 gallons, and anytime they crossed a stream of water, if it wasn't full, old Cookie would fill it up with an old bucket that he had. Come around to the front, there was a box there that had all the stakes that he needed to set that wagon fly up no matter where he was. Now, under a lot of them wagons also, there was a thing called a possum belly. A possum belly was a piece of old cowhide or elk hide or deer hide that was stretched the bottom of that wagon, and he could throw firewood in there. But if there wasn't firewood, what were we going to burn? Buffalo chips. Now, when we're talking about buffalo chips, we ain't talking about tater chips, folks. We're talking about the deposit they made on the prairie so many years ago. And when them things are dry, they will light easy and they will last a long time, but they will put out a lot of heat. So up there at the front of that wagon is the wagon tongue. Now, when old Cookie would drive them mules into camp and park, you know what he was doing? He was using a compass, the North Star. He knew where it was going to be out there, and he would line that wagon tongue up with the North Star, so in the morning, if it was foggy, if it was dusty, if he couldn't see way before light, he knew he was headed north. That was the right direction for him to go. Now, laying up there by that tongue were two galvanized pans, wreck pans. Now, these wreck pans, one has soapy water, one has clean water. This is where all the dishes went that were going to be accumulated during the day that they were eating. Now, let me just give y'all a general idea of the cooking supplies that old Cookie might have had. Now, there was always a crosscut saw. There was always a shovel. There was always an axe. And there might have even been a duker dog. I don't know for sure, but you like this part, don't you? And a pickaxe was there because old Cookie was digging a hole in the ground to get this fire started every day. But he'd have a pot rack is what I called it. It'd be a rack that went over that fire, but two things that come up, a rod that went across, he could hang a coffee pot on there. He could hang a Dutch oven on there. Now, we get back around here to that chuck box. Now, old Cookie's sure he's going to have every utensil in there that he needed. Spoons, knives, forks, something to serve him with, coffee cups. Now, he was going to have bean pots, but he was going to have skillets, cast iron skillets, Dutch ovens that he could cook with. You know, we've talked about this before in other videos, but really, cooking then, it wasn't a glamorous lifestyle. Cookie getting up a lot of times 2 o'clock in the morning, feeding them boys, hitching up the team, taking off. Ain't no lunchtime. 2 meals a day. For breakfast, beans, biscuits, and coffee. At supper time, we're going to have some more of them beans. We're always going to have coffee, and we're always going to have biscuits. But maybe Cookie got lucky. Maybe there was something run across the trail that he could kill. Maybe it was a jackrabbit. Maybe it was a rattlesnake that come by. He could make some chili out of. But folks, they was just 2 meals a day, and they was long, long days every day. So let's talk about the rules and the code of ethics that went around this camp during them cattle drives back during the mid-1800s. The ones that the cowboys knew and respected and old Cookie was going to enforce. There was sacred ground there. That was the chuck wagon. That was the area in which all the food was prepared. And between that fire that old Cookie had and that chuck box lid, that was the most sacred ground ever. Nobody walked through that spot. Now, when you go to talking about a cook, and the cook was really, to me, the most important man on the drive, because when you had a good cook, cowboys are going to work better. He had a lot of authority. To me, really, he was second in charge. There was the man that was putting the drive together that owned the cattle, but the cook was second in line, and he took care of everybody there. Being an old wagon cook back during them days had more than just one job title. Not only was he cooking, but he was a navigator. He had to always be ahead of the crew. That way he could have camp set up when them guys got 14 or 15 miles down the trail to know where they're going to come to eat. But also he was a doctor, he was a dentist, he was a philosopher. Sometimes I think he was even a nursemaid. There was black cooks, Hispanic cooks. They might even been some Irish cooks, because there was a lot of folks that come from overseas during that time, and they were looking for a job. Anything that they could do to make a living. But let's get back to them rules. When Cookie had that camp set up and the fly was stretched out there, nobody come under that fly unless they asked permission. Now y'all know that's sacred ground over there. But when he had that fly set up too as well, it's sacred ground all the way around. And no cowboy in his right mind would ever come up to that fly and just walk under it. I don't care which side of the stove or the fire it was on. A real hand knows better. He's going to have permission. Something you never did is what we call dust the cook. And that was when you ride a horse or you drove cattle too close to the wagon and the wind was carrying that dust plumb over him. You would not eat supper that night, probably nor breakfast. This was not a drive-up window. And you're not going to come up there and you're going to say, "Hey, Cookie, I'd like this and this and this." Never ask what the cook was cooking or what you're going to have tomorrow. That was the cook's job, and he knew what he was going to have. Now, say you were on one of them drives and you're going across ranch country that somebody else had owned, and these folks come out to greet you, and they had a woman with them. Now, when there was a woman in camp and Cookie seen her there, he would take a white dish towel, tie it up in the corner of the fly. That way, when these cowboys come riding in, they could see that white rag flopping. They knew what? There was a lady present in camp. There would be no foul language. You see that chuck box lid is folded down. At night, when old Cookie was through, he'd fold it up, latch it. But Cookie knew if somebody had pried stuff in there. I heard a tale one time where this old Cookie would always take a turkey feather and put it in there when that chuck box slammed. And if that feather was on the outside on the ground, he knew a thief had been there in the night. What was they after, some of them? Vanilla. They'd drank it. I mean, these folks might have been needing a drink pretty bad, but also one thing that would really be gone, sugar. And back then they had a lot of Arbuckle's coffee, and in that coffee, what was there? A peppermint stick. Cookie hardly ever got to finish one of them by himself because some cowboy would steal it. Well, that was back then during the 1880s and all the cattle drives. And I'm so thankful that them old Cookies come before me and laid them paths out, but also give me them rules to go by. We still cook on a lot of working ranches. We still feed cowboys. But one thing about it, we still have the rules that applied back then. We're a whole lot more lenient than old Cookie was back during the day. And we're also feeding 3 meals a day. But we have added some more rules to our camp cooking. But today around camp, there's 2 things that I stress the first time I set up the wagon, and I tell them, we will not have foul language in camp, and we will not talk politics. But also things that I think cowboys know that I expect out of them, and that is manners and the respect they have for not only me, but each other. Now, typically when we go in on a ranch, a lot of times we would start on a Sunday afternoon. Now, it was always tradition that the cowboys helped you set up your camp first, and while were you getting everything laid out after that, they were setting up their houses, their teepees. You know, back during Cookie's old time, them cowboys wasn't sleeping in canvas teepees like they do today. On the back of that saddle was tied up in a tarp, a blanket. On top of that was usually a slicker, which is a raincoat, and them boys were sleeping right out there in the elements. When them cowboys is setting up teepee, they're not setting them right around camp. They know that that is one of the rules that I'm going to enforce. and they're going to get far enough away from camp that the noise that I'm making 2 hours before they get up don't disturb them. After each meal, them cowboys know you just don't leave that plate sitting there on the table or sitting on the ground. You take it over there. If it's got anything left in it, you go out there out of camp, scrape that out. Then you put it in the soapy water at the rec pan. You know, me and Shan have washed a lot of dishes in camp. But if you had a really good crew, and most of the time we did, them boys would pitch in at supper time and they'd wash them for you. But them cowboys know when they come under that fly and we're fixing to get ready to eat, everybody pulls that hat off their head and we're going to bless the food before we ever partake in it. Now, there is a term, and it's called shapping. If you ride too close to camp and you dust the cook, a shapping's probably going to happen to you. But it's not coming from me. It's coming from them old hands that knew that law and knew the rule. But a shapping could also be done as a prank. You never walked into camp and said, "Hey, today's my birthday." They gonna drag that feller out of that teepee, stretch him out, take him leather leggings, and whoop his butt. But one of the best pranks I ever seen is one that I pulled myself. You know, there was this fella that come up to camp, and he was a friend of mine, and every day he would leave his towel or maybe his socks hanging on the wagon, and I'd tell him, "I'm not your mama. Take your stuff home with you when you go." And he'd come over by the water barrel, get him some toothpaste, and brush his teeth every day, and they just set it right there on top of the water barrel. He did this for 3 days in a row, and I told him every morning, "Hey, I don't see that there no more." He rode off that day, and it was pretty warm that day, so I'm thinking, you know, I got a little time before I'm going to have to make a cake. So I went over and I took that toothpaste, squirted me some in a half a cup, went out there to the freshest green cow pie that I could find, brought it back over, and went to putting it in there like I was loading a muzzle loader. I just kept poking that green stuff in there, put a little white right on top out of there that I had from that toothpaste that I took out first. Next morning he come into camp. He said, "I'm sorry I forgot to get my toothbrush and stuff. This'll be the last day, I promise." Got that toothbrush wet. It's dark, he can't see the colors. Later on there, brushed them teeth. He never said a word. And that toothbrush in there was never there again. But you know what is really the most important thing are not just the rules around camp, but the rule and the code of conduct that you go through with the rest of your life. That is what we call really the code of the West. Something that the cowboys always portrayed, and we're still going to keep it moving. I think the first one would be riding for the brand. Now, when I think of that first off, that's riding for the brand of Jesus Christ our Savior, and it's branded in my heart. But really, when you look at it too, and you're working for somebody, and you're branding cattle, you have to put that brand on there right. You want to make a mark. You want to make sure that it is correct because you're representing that person. You're riding for that brand. So whatever you're riding for, hey, do it with pride, do it with honor. You know, and if y'all are interested, I wrote a story about riding for the brand. It's in one of our cookbooks. You be sure and check it out. You know, my mother always taught me, and it's something that's been a code around our house and every camp that I ever knowed from a cowboy too, and that was your word. You have your name and your word. And my mother would always tell me, be sure and not tarnish either one. When you talk about deals that were made, and people look at them today and deals that you have going on in life, and you got to sign that piece of paper. It's a contract. 33 years, you're going to pay this off. The only contract we ever had back then was a handshake. You knew when you got a hold of it, it was full of pride and it was full of honesty. And speaking of handshakes, you always looked a man in the eye when you shook his hand. You know, you can always tell a lot about a man by the way he treats his horse, the way he treats his wife, his kids. This man knows a lot about respect. And when you're going through life and you come up to a gate, if it's open, leave it open. But if it's shut, you shut it. Leave it as you found it. You know, I was taught a long time ago, you'd never judge a man by the hat he wears on his head, nor the horse he rides. But a thing that will get you as far in life as respect and manners and the way to treat people is faith. You gotta have faith. Faith is gonna bring about hope. Hope is gonna bring about prosperity. So always remember, I'm gonna have faith. I'm gonna use this code of conduct and ethics that these cowboys and these old cooks passed on down to me, and I'm gonna make sure that I treat everyone in life a whole lot better than I have been. But also remember this, If times ever get dark or times get hard, reach back and grab it. Faith. The faith we have in God. He's hearing our prayers every day. So never give up on that faith, because that brings about the hope and the love and the happiness that you're going to get from having that faith in Him. You know, we talk about the things that took place back in Cookie's time, but also in our time. But you can apply them both to your life. Don't be afraid of the challenges that come before you. Don't be afraid to take a step that might not be on the path. Get out there and make a life for yourself and enjoy every day like it's the last one you got. But it is with pride, honor, and most respect that I tip my hat to all the servicemen and women and all the veterans that have kept that old flag flying over camp. We commend you all. We do. And if you really enjoyed this, go back and look. We have other videos about the chuck wagon and the life down the trail, what it took to feed them cowboys. We'll put that playlist at the end of this video. But did we miss one? Would you like to add maybe a code of conduct or something that you could pass on to us? Leave us a comment down there below. God bless you, each and every one, and we'll see you down the trail.